afternoon, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Erwin Chemerinsky, and I have the great privilege of being the Dean of Berkeley Law. We're here for a very special occasion to celebrate a true hero, Judge Thelton Henderson, Berkeley Law Class of 1962. And the occasion for this is to celebrate a terrific gift to create the Thelton Henderson Chair in Civil Rights at Berkeley Law. What it means is that so long as this law school exists, there will be a Thelton Henderson Chair in Civil Rights. It also means that it creates a new faculty position in the law school, an additional FTE, and next year we'll be able to hire somebody in light of that gift. And it's a result of an incredibly generous $6 million gift from Bob and Colleen Haas. And I want to start by thanking them for making all of this possible. Henderson for many reasons, including that Colleen spent many years working directly with Judge Henderson. What we're here to do is to celebrate Judge Henderson, and so let me just tell you a little bit about his background, though I know a lot more will come out in this conversation with Judge Fletcher. Judge Henderson was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. He was an undergraduate here at Berkeley, then served in the military, and then came to Berkeley Law and graduated, as I said, in the class of 1962. After that, he went to work for the United States Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. He was the first black lawyer to be in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Following his tenure in government, he was a civil rights lawyer here in the Bay Area. He worked as a legal service lawyer. He worked as administrator at Stanford Law School. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter made the wise choice of appointing Thelton Henderson to be a judge on the United States District Court for the Northern District of California. He served as an active federal judge to the year 2017. And I'm sure there'll be a good deal of discussion between Judge Fletcher and Judge Henderson about the incredible cases that Judge Henderson decided and presided over. And I think the one thing that everyone knew in the legal community that was Judge Henderson was an incredibly fair, thoughtful, compassionate judge. He embodied what we want every federal judge to be in doing justice. Now, he remarked to me as a result of this gift, he's been teased and called the $6 million man. And of course, that's only an enormous underestimation of what truly has been worth to this community and to the entire United States with regard to his contributions to civil rights and to civil liberties. And so I also get to introduce somebody else who's a hero to me to do the conversation with Henderson, and that's Judge William Fletcher. Graduate of Harvard University, a Rhodes Scholar, graduate of Yale Law School, clerk including for Justice William Brennan on the Supreme Court, and he became a professor here at Berkeley in 1977. And he's continued to teach at Berkeley over all of these years, including after in 1998 being named and confirmed as a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. And he too, in all of his judging, embodies everything that a judge should be in terms of advancing justice. So it's a great pleasure to turn this over to Judge Fletcher to interview Judge Henderson. And again, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Erwin. Thank you, Bob and Colleen Haas, for this generous gift honoring this man whom we so revere. I'll introduce this by an introduction that I heard some years ago. Thelton was being given awards, I don't know, every couple of weeks, and we would go. And the man introducing him said, you know, I didn't know Judge Henderson, so I called around to his friends to see what they thought of him. And they said words like sneaky, untrustworthy, don't trust him out of your sight. And then he realized he was calling his poke poker-playing friends. And I have played poker with Thelton Henderson. In fact, one of our fellow poker players is here in the audience today for the last, 20 years, and he was absolutely right. My wife Linda and I moved onto Thelton's Street here in Berkeley 47 years ago. We are separated by a single house. We have been friends and neighbors for a very long time. And you know people in a different way when they're neighbors, for better, for worse. And I've got to tell you, with respect to Thelton, it's always for better. And I'm deeply honored to be able to participate in this by asking Thelton questions about his career, both immediately after graduation from Berkeley, and then a couple of what I think are, he's decided many cases, but a couple of his particularly important cases. First, let's start with graduation from Berkeley. In your third year, there was a note on the bulletin board from the then dean that said, "Come see me." So what happened?
Well, I got nervous. When I saw that, it was unusual. Dean Prosser was the dean at that time. And I thought, okay, my last semester, I know I'm going to graduate. My grades aren't that important at this point. So I missed a few classes, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm getting chewed out. But it was much better than that. One of the things that turned my life around, in fact, John Doerr, who worked in the Civil Rights Division, I had been told by Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, to go around and try to diversify some of the departments in the Justice Department. And it said, "How many blacks do you have working for you?" To them, one day one of them said, "How many blacks do you have working for you, Mr. Doerr?" And he was in the Civil Rights Division, and there hadn't been one. So my great fortune, I've been a lucky guy, and you'll hear this throughout, it's really true. He was a graduate of Bolt Hall, so he called his alma mater and said, "Do you have any blacks graduating this year?" And at that time in Bolt Hall's history, and I've gotten permission to still call it Bolt Hall, so I'll do that. There were 2 blacks. It was the first class in the history of the law school to graduate 2 blacks that year. And my great fortune again was that Dean Prosser recommended me. And so that turned my life around, because at that point, I was trying to decide whether I was going to go to Los Angeles, where I grew up, to practice law, or stay in Berkeley. And instead, I went to Washington, D.C., and got one of the greatest jobs I could ever get, working for the Civil Rights Division, and ultimately meeting people like Martin Luther King and the like.
And you worked there for a time, and I've always been, I guess I want to say, horrified and defensive on your behalf, because as I see the film clips from you during that period, you are all by yourself.
Right.
And tell us a little bit how that worked out, what you did, and then there's an end to the story that we'll get to in a moment.
It was lonely, it was scary, it was new. You'd come up with new situations, you had to think on your feet. And they wouldn't let me go out in the field for about 7 or 8 months, because they weren't sure how a black man was going to go down to Mississippi, Birmingham, or Selma, or Jackson, or wherever, and act as if you had some authority, pull out an ID and question people. And so they trained me and kept me inside for a long time, and finally they did send me out into the field. And it was a wonderful experience. I grew up in Los Angeles, as I said, and I'm getting in this wonderful gift from the Haas's for civil rights. But at this point in my life, I didn't know anything about civil rights. I wasn't particularly interested in it. I wasn't disinterested, But I got to go down south and meet people. Let me jump ahead. My biggest experience that got me involved in civil rights and commitment to a cause was when I got a call. I was in Shreveport, Louisiana, working on a voting rights case. John Doerr called me and said, I want you to get over to Birmingham right away. There's something going on. Well, it was, if you look at on Black History Month, you'll always see pictures of little kids being washed down the park with fire hoses and bitten by dogs. This was a children's crusade. All the adults in Birmingham had been arrested or intimidated. King couldn't get people to go out and demonstrate. And James Bevel's, one of his lieutenants, had the brilliant idea of, well, let's get the kids to go out. And so I rushed to Birmingham from Louisiana and went to the 14th Street Baptist Church and went down to the basement where King was. And it was an eye-opener for me that led me to wherever I went from there. I saw these young kids, many of them in overalls and bare feet, coming in 12 years, 15 years, 16 years. Each of them had a face towel with a toothbrush and a toothpaste in it in their pocket, ready to go to jail. That was to go to jail. They were brave, and I saw this bravery. I saw the people training them. If they get you on the ground, cover up. And I thought, gee, this kind of bravery, I'd never thought of it before. It just changed me forever to seeing people with this kind of a commitment. Anything I've done from that day forward was because of that experience, seeing those people. And Dr. King himself, I talked to him many times, and it was clear to me that he knew that he was not going to make it all the way. And you'll see again in Black History Month where he's talking, he says, I may not get there with you. And he knew that, and seeing that kind of bravery, I didn't match that bravery, but it certainly pushed me to do bigger and better things.
And you were there in the South for quite a long time. It came to an interesting end when the King people had a bad tire on their car. Would you tell us that story?
Yeah, it came to an end all right. It took me years to say this, but I can now say it. I used to say I left the Justice Department and I went on to blah, blah, blah. But the truth is I got fired. And it happened this way. There was only one place we could stay in Birmingham, and King and I were staying at the A.G. Gaston Motel. And one night I was coming in from working in the field, and he was just being driven out by Reverend Vernon Smith going to Selma, where he was going to start the big movement that you've also seen in the real newsreels about the march across the bridge in Selma. I was driving in, he was driving out. We rolled down our windows and we talked for a few minutes. And at the end of it, he said, oh, you're going to be using your car tonight. And I said, nope, I'm through for the day. I'm going to go in, I'm going to eat and go to my room. He said, well, could we use your car? Vernon Smith has a bad tire, and we're worried about it. And I said, of course you can use it. And that was a no-brainer, because the road, 78 miles, I believe it was, from Birmingham to Selma, was through Klan country. And the last thing you want is for King to be a flat tire, broken down in the night, going through Klan country. So I didn't give it any thought. I parked my car, gave the keys to them, and they drove off. We were both very naive. We didn't know we were both being followed every place we went. And of course they followed and traced the license plate and found out that it was a car rented to a government attorney, a civil rights attorney, and they used that as a big political thing. And it ended up with me getting fired to take the government off the hot spot.
And I have to say that, and I've heard you say this before, in the headlines the next day, you were a very high-level government employee.
Right, the Birmingham News, or whatever the newspaper was, started off a high-ranking government official. And I thought, I've never been described that importantly before in my life. But yeah.
And had this not happened, would you have stayed in the Justice Department?
I'm sure I would have. Yes, I was just warming up to it. It was a wonderful job for someone, and there's some law students here and some recent graduates. To get out of law school and your first job, after a few months, you find yourself hanging out with Martin Luther King. And not only hanging out and meeting him from time to time, once they found out how the movement responded to having a black attorney from the Justice Department on civil rights, I just followed him wherever he went. So I was on the scene of everything that was on the news. Couldn't have been a better job for a recent law school grad.
Well, sometimes the middle of the story is a lot worse than the end of the story. Meaning, had that not happened, you would never have come back to California.
That's right.
And so what happens when you come back to California? I want to fast forward up to the time you become a federal judge, but if you could give us just a quick, from that point to becoming a federal judge.
Okay, first of all, I decided I wanted to write about this. I had been on the inside of many, many stories that I wanted to tell. So I'd made some friends there, and for 6 months they let me live with them, and I went to the library, the local library, just about every morning, researching and writing, trying to write about this experience I had and the inside stuff of the civil rights movement. And finally, I realized after working really hard at it that, one, I wasn't a good writer. I wrote pretty good legal briefs and things, but I wasn't a good writer. I finally gave up. I ran out of money. So I came back to California with my tail between my legs, having been fired on my first job. And I really settled in not far from here on Benvenue, a couple of blocks from the law school, to a room I had lived in as an undergrad when I was an undergrad here. And this will show you a bit about inflation. I still remember my monthly rent in this rooming house was $28 a month. And I started trying to put my life back together. I bumped into a friend, looked up a friend, his name was Donald Warden, was a year ahead of me. He was black. He was the one black in the class a year ahead of me. And back then, you older lawyers might remember, lawyers couldn't advertise. But Donald was a brilliant guy. He had a radio program. And what better advertising can you do than having a radio program? And he had a lot of clients. He had a big, thriving practice, and he was practicing by himself. So he started giving me, here's $25, Thelton, would you go to Richmond and take this arraignment for me? And I was still trying to write, and I was trying to exist on that. Finally, I gave up and started practicing law with Don. And I realized that that wasn't the kind of law I wanted to practice. It was a neighborhood practice, didn't take depositions. You'd come in, someone would come in and say, I have to be in court next Monday for such and such a thing. And they had a book back then, the Bar Association, with the price of things. Okay, you have a DUI, look up, oh, that costs $700, $750. That'll be $750. they would pull it out and say, oh gosh, all I have is 637. I'll take it, you know. And it was kind of that practice. And that isn't what I wanted. So I left there and went with Senator Nick Petrus, Fitzsimmons and Petrus, which was a good law firm, and it did the kind of law I wanted to do. Was doing well there, doing a variety of things, and I did a lot of the criminal things for them for some reason. Won a couple of first-degree murder cases and was getting a reputation there. Then I got a call one day from a reporter that I knew from my civil rights days that were with the Washington Post. He was now the recruiter for the Peace Corps. And he said, have you ever thought about working for the Peace Corps? And I'd never thought about it, and it sounded interesting. And I flew back. He said, we'll pay your way back. I flew back and interviewed for it, and 2 days later I was flying back to California, and they had appointed me as the head of the Peace Corps in the Cameroons in Africa. So I told Senator Petrus I was going to leave and go to the Peace Corps. And I waited for them to call me, and finally I didn't hear anything. I called the reporter, and I said, what's happening? He said, I thought you were in the Camerons. Let me check. And he said, well, turns out they were befuddled. What do we do with this guy who got fired from the federal government? Can we hire him for the Peace Corps? And he says, oh, we'll take care of it. It's no big deal. But I said, screw it, excuse my language. And I left there, and I was really stumbling around at this point, as you can see. I left there, and just when a friend had told me about the legal aid, San Mateo County was starting a legal aid operation, and they wanted a lawyer for East Palo Alto, which back then was an all-black community, unincorporated community. So I decided to do that. I took the job with the Legal Aid Society, and we're now up to 67 or so, and had a number of Stanford students working for me. And one day one of them said, gee, Stanford's graduating its first black in the history of the school. This was 1968, Sally Ann Payton. And I was fiery enough in those days to say, how could that be? And call the dean and ask to speak to him. And how could you not have a black before now? Long story short, the dean, Bayless Manning, ended up offering me a half-time job to start a minority program for Stanford Law School. And I thought that was very important. So I went half-time with legal aid and half-time at Stanford. And for you young people who may try to venture two half-time jobs, let me assure you, there's no such thing as two half-time jobs. You can't do it. And I had to go from one to the other, so I left legal aid. I had an associate there who was ready to take it over and was anxious to. I went to Stanford full-time, and I didn't know at that time, but if I had, I would have realized, gee, this was a move that's going to introduce me to Colleen Gershon, a bright young student at Stanford, and some years later, she and her husband are going to give the law school $6 million for you to have a fellowship. I didn't know that at the time, but that's pretty much what happened.
Well, we'll fast forward a little bit. My wife Linda and I moved onto Thelton Street 47 years ago. We've been neighbors ever since. Thelton was made a judge before I was. He became a judge appointed by Jimmy Carter. I was much later appointed by President Clinton. And I recall early on in my tenure as a judge, I had the great privilege of affirming Judge Henderson on a Batson claim. That's a jury selection race discrimination question. And my wife Linda had the very good idea. She said, why don't you just serve it on Thelton? So I took my opinion, affirming Judge Henderson, down the street, 2 doors, knocked on the door and said, you are served. And I've been trying just to tease, to reverse him ever since, but he's so good I've never found a way to do it.
But I'm still proud to claim that I think I'm the only federal trial court judge to get his opinion hand-delivered to him by the appellate court.
Well, there's so many things that we could talk about with respect to Judge Henderson's judicial career. We've chosen to talk about, or maybe I've chosen to talk about, and Judge Henderson has acquiesced, 2 of his important prison cases. The first one, he was sitting by himself as a district judge. The second one, he started out sitting by himself, but it ends up as a 3-judge district court. The first one involved Pelican Bay, which was then a brand new maximum security prison in Northern California. And it was, Thelton can describe this to you, it was a troubled institution. So how did that case first come to your attention?
Well, it first came to my attention when I was chief judge at this point of the court, Northern District of California in San Francisco. And we started getting some handwritten complaints from this new place up near the Oregon border called Pelican Bay, which I'd never heard of up until this point. And they were describing, handwritten, most of them. There were some jailhouse lawyers up there that were writing them for the prisoners, describing all kinds of atrocities, almost like torture, and being left out in the cold in cages up into the night and freezing, and cell extractions where their heads are getting cracked in. And as chief judge, we were getting dozens of these, and our caseload was expanding, and we were having to assign them, and I was wondering about how we were going to handle all these cases. And I just, on a pure chance, I contacted the warden and said, I'd like to talk to you about what's going on and how we're going to respond to all of these complaints. And to my surprise, he said, well, I'll be happy to come down and talk to you about it. So he came down to the court to talk, and I assembled about 6 of the senior judges on our court, and we met with him. And his favorite term, as he talked about it, was that, and he was proud of what the prison was doing. We hold the worst of the worst in the California system. And they did. All the really bad guys, the gang leaders and the biggest offenders, the biggest problems, were all being put at Pelican Bay to be controlled under one roof. And as he described the ways they handle these worst of the worst, the judges were like whispering, they can't do that, to each other. And he's telling it like he's proud of how he's putting these people in their place. And so I knew we really had a problem. And so we set up a special system to assign these cases. And it was not, I didn't get this case because I was chief. It was really randomly assigned to me. But I treated it with all the importance, knowing what I was hearing. So
And did you do visits to Pelican Bay?
Oh, a lot of visits. I guess you could call me an activist judge. I really believe that being a presence there and knowing there is a real judge and he's really interested in this case makes a difference at these institutions. And so I went up there quite often, and it was interesting. I would try to go unannounced, and Karen was my law clerk there. She went with me a couple of times, as did other of my law clerks. And we would stay at a motel in Crescent City, and then try to go in unannounced the next day, but they knew we were there. You know, they weren't surprised, so we realized that Crescent City was a prison town. Everybody all worked there and everybody knew it. I'd check into the motel, and they'd say, "Hey, the judge is here." And so we had to go to a different airport and drive in that morning to come unannounced. But I would visit there regularly just to see what's going on and to know firsthand.
Was there any time during one of your visits where they put on I know the answer to this question, where they put on a show for you?
Oh, did they put on a show? Yeah. One day, we were walking around the building, and we were going to go up into one of the towers to look out onto the yard, the recreation yard. Again, Karen Kramer and I, there was another clerk, Ed Swanson, and Letty. Weren't you there, Letty? Yeah, Letty was there. Letty Volpe, who teaches some of you students. Karen and I were going up the tower, those circular stairs, and we heard what sounded like gunshots and some noise. And by the time we got up to look out onto the yard, there were all the prisoners spread out on all fours, face down. Ed Swanson in his suit, face down in the dirt. And they had claimed that there was a riot they were putting out. But we left, and I just knew that wasn't a coincidence. And it wasn't. It turned out it was staged. The idea was to show us how bad things are, that this is a daily life. There were shots fired down there, but no one was hit. But it was staged, and a couple of years later, more than a couple, two of the people that precipitated this staged event were actually prosecuted for false statements. So this is the way it went.
And it's obvious you were getting a fair amount of resistance to this.
Oh, yeah.
For those of you who are interested, I'm going to read the citation. I would recommend, I don't have it right here in front of me, that there is a 140-page district court opinion written by Judge Henderson in this case, detailing in extraordinary, and I will say excruciating detail, the mistreatment that some of these prisoners were suffering. I remember one in particular, the man who was put in the scalding hot water.
The Dorsch case,
yeah. Would you describe that one, just to get a sense of how bad things were in that prison?
Yeah, there were. This was a prisoner who had some mental problems, and I learned that certain people, when they get in an institution like that, and things go wrong, they had a habit of smearing themselves in their own feces. And the guards or the nurses or the medical people would have to clean them off. Well, prisoner Dorsch did that, and the guards were in just a particularly bad mood that day. They took him to the medical unit where they do hot baths, and they had these tubs that could put the water up to boiling temperatures. And they took him and just, instead of taking him to the shower and cleaning him off, they dumped him in this tub, and the skin literally melted off his legs. And, and one of the nurses testified at the trial later on, and Dorsch doesn't sound like a black name, but you have to be a black prisoner. They said his skin turned white from the boiling. And they said, "Oh, you look like a white boy." One of that was testified at. And it was just this kind of routine sadism, I would call it. And a couple of times when I went walking around visiting parts of the prison, I would see cages that were the size of a telephone booth with prisoners standing in there, sometimes in their underwear, and it's cold outside. And this is just punishment. I had no trouble on that trial of finding the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment had been violated.
So for those of you with a pencil and those of you who wish to read this, it's an extraordinary document. 889 F Sup 1146, 1995. It's 140 pages of recounting the trial testimony, the evidence, and saying, at the end, of course, no surprise, that this is unconstitutional behavior. So what kind of remedy could you institute for this?
Well, I appointed a special master at this point to supervise, and I wrote up the remedies that they should do, the things they had to stop doing immediately, the things they should start doing. And I had a special monitor who visited regularly and reported regularly to me to make sure that they were doing these things.
And does the special monitor still exist for the prison?
Still exists. It's amazing. It just still goes on because they aren't doing the things. They're things that are doable. Other prisons do it, but they refuse to do it, and they're paying the cost. The monitor has gotten rich. They pay him his hourly rate, it's quite extraordinary.
So for those of you who think that horrible prisons are purely a phenomenon of our southern states, that's not true.
That's not true
for
at
those
all.
of you who watch, I don't know, the movie Brubaker, which is Arkansas prisons, it's not confined to Arkansas. Now, at the end of this, you write a 140-page opinion. Did they appeal?
Oh boy. Did they appeal, Karen? No. She says no. I'm getting old and forgetful.
Just so you know, this is what law clerks are for.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I wanted to correct you on something, but because I see your law clerks here. When he said, for those of you who don't know how courts work, when he said, Judge Henderson wrote 140 pages, I looked out and saw Karen say, I did it.
So they did not appeal. Now,
No, they didn't appeal.
I'm reading between the lines. They didn't appeal because they knew they were wrong.
They knew they were wrong. Yeah, they were caught. Yeah, and I actually toned it down. They were so far over the line that I actually didn't have to stretch anything, and they knew that they got off better than they could have in what I might have written.
And now I want to move on to the next case that's related. And they're related not only in the ordinary sense, but it turns out related as a matter of law.
Mm-hmm.
A suit is filed in the Northern District of California, where Judge Henderson is a judge, and it challenges not conditions in a particular prison, it challenges the health care provided to ill prisoners in the entirety of the California prison system. And the plaintiffs, who were trying to get the California system to behave itself, filed a notice of related case. Now, a notice of related case means that you get back to the same judge who decided the earlier case. That is to say, the same judge who decided the case you just heard about. So what happens after they file the notice of related case?
Okay, well, they filed a notice of related saying, this is to bring to your attention, Judge, that this new case we're filing is related to another case that you've tried. And the purpose of the related case rule is, one, efficiency. I've gotten some knowledge about the prison system, and I'm familiar with it. It gives me a head start, and it makes sense to do this and bring more knowledge to this related case. But also it's to ensure that you have consistent rulings. So it's to avoid having one judge saying, oh, that was a violation of the Eighth Amendment, or that one wasn't, but they're very similar. So it's for those two purposes that they're required to file a related case notice.
And was it truly a related case? These sound kind of different.
Yeah, they sound kind of different, but they were related enough that I related them.
And here's an important point. The state joined in the notice of related case.
They did.
So why in the world would the state, which had had its head handed to it in the first case, want to see you again?
You know, I'm never sure why they did that, but I think the attorney, who was it was interesting, the attorney for the state was a very principled guy. He really, I respected him. He had a tough case. And I think he respected the way I handled that case. As I said, I really toned it down. I didn't yell as much as I might have wanted to. But that's the only reason I can think of.
Well, I'm going to turn this into my federal courts class. Mm-hmm. Judge Henderson for years has come to my federal courts class and told these stories. Mm-hmm. And one of the things in federal courts that you try to figure out, what is a case, how does it work, how do you have adversary parties, and so on. I'm not sure the state wanted to win this case, or at least I'm not sure that certain people in the state wanted to win this case, because the problem was money.
Yeah.
Money coming out of the legislature. And the prison system needed more money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, that's right. Your memory's better than mine.
Well, it's my cynical thing of, I pretend I'm your adversary, but the truth is, please don't throw me in that briar patch.
Yeah.
I actually would kind of like that to happen.
Yeah.
Well, this case proceeds for a time with just Judge Henderson dealing with the physical medical care that's provided. It's later consolidated with a case in front of Judge Carlton in Sacramento, who had mental health care provided. That then turns into a 3-judge district court. 3 judges, and then including one of us, one of the Ninth Circuit judges drawn at random, turned out to be Judge Reinhardt. And for those of you who know sort of your scorecard of judges, this was a dream team for the plaintiffs. But before we get to that point, I was intrigued at the time, and even more so later. You handled this case, when it was yours, during the governorships of 2 governors. Mm-hmm. And they both came to your house themselves. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, they were very interested in my case, and they were lobbying me, Jerry Brown and Judge Schwarzenegger. And I was happy to meet with them, certainly at the start, because I thought we would try to reach some solution in private, agreement as to what ought to be done, and it would ease the way to make these changes. But over a period of time, it became clear that they were looking to persuade me to back off a bit rather than to do the things that I felt I had to do. But we met regularly, and Jerry Brown would actually come to my house, and we'd sit around and talk. And Schwarzenegger, I always came to Sacramento. Schwarzenegger, in particular, gave me the courage, if that's the correct word, because I ended up, as you know, Willie, appointing a receiver to really take over the medical part of the prison system, and that had never been done in the history of our case. I had my clerks research receivers, which I wasn't familiar with them, and we could only find one case in which a receiver had been appointed, and that was for a jail, not a prison, and it was a small jail in Ohio, and it was by mutual consent. But what I think gave me the guts, the courage, or whatever to appoint a receiver to take over was that at one of the meetings, and I'll do for you that awful Schwarzenegger impersonation that you've heard. He said, "Well, Thelton, what I really wish you would do is take this case off my hands." And I thought, and it was just not indirect, but not a direct way of saying, do something that I can't do anything, but I wish you would, something needs to be done and you do it. And so I took this as a permission, or at least incentive, to appoint a receiver. And I appointed a receiver who literally took over and to this day is still running the medical part of the California prison system. And that way we were able to get things done. He does them, he hired the people, he made the rules, and that's the way we were able to move forward. But the governors, I learned a lot about politics and how they work, and they didn't have the wherewithal to be able to push it forward.
And was there a difference between the way Governor Schwarzenegger responded and the way Governor Brown responded?
Yeah, there was. I think that, and again, I think that the Governor Brown, not pointing fingers, I like him, I admire him, but I think he was influenced by his relationship with the guards union, because they had given him, when he ran for governor, over $1 million toward his campaign. And I just have to believe that played a part in his passivity in that. And we got into it kind of hot a few times. I would say, look, a prisoner, to this day, a fact I found in that case has never been denied by the state of California, that a prisoner was dying on average every 6 days for lack of adequate medical care. Not that they were dying, but because of the inadequate medical care. And I would say, you always brag about being a Jesuit. This isn't what it doesn't sound, and we would sometimes go at it. We'd always go, but it was with respect to each other, but we would talk pretty tough to each other.
And for those of you who want to take a tour of San Quentin, which I recommend actually, as part of the tour, you will see a modern medical facility in the middle of the prison as a result of an order from Judge Henderson. And it should have, but at this point I don't think yet does have, a plaque on the outside of that building that says Judge Henderson Medical Facility. But it's right there in brick and mortar. My wife Linda and I have walked through it. It's a modern facility. You might as well be walking through a modern hospital. Abby Ginsburg has made a film about Judge Henderson, and she updated it with a tour of San Quentin. And I wasn't there, but I think you can tell me, Thelton, about the prisoners' reception of you when you came to tour the prison.
Oh, it was very, very touching, and especially if you get to know prisoners like I did, and you see them, and you know their record, and they're hardcore, they're tough, they don't like to show emotion. But anyway, I went to the prison, and the warden set up a meeting there. I was going to address them in the chapel, and I was in a wheelchair at that point, and just like I am now. And as we wheeled into the back of the chapel and came into the church, one of my clerks was pushing me. The prisoners stood up and clapped in a way that it was just very touching. It brought me to near tears. It just to see them in that respectful mode that they almost never get in. It was deeply, deeply touching.
And it, of course, precisely because they recognized what you had done for them.
Mm.
I'm going to editorialize just a little bit. I've been a federal appellate judge now for 25 years. I taught here in this law school, federal courts, federal jurisdiction, so I know an awful lot about federal judges, federal district judges. This is not an ordinary federal district judge. We have a notion, sort of a naive notion of judges being, well, here's the law, that's the answer, and there you are. But in these, I'll call them institutional cases, where the issue is an institution that needs reform. What you need is a judge of intelligence. If I can say it this way, from his poker playing days, he can read the other guy's hand, perseverance, intelligence, and he's going to stick with it. And we see this in the California prison system, even though we still have a receiver, right?
We still have a receiver.
That is to say, it's not quite been finished. So tell us what happens with the case after it becomes a 3-judge district court. So you have physical care. Larry Carlton in Sacramento has mental care.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Reinhardt is drawn from the Ninth Circuit, so it's now a 3-judge district court.
Right.
So what happens?
Well, quick explanation of how that happens. The plaintiffs, the prison law office brought these lawsuits, and there's something called the Prison Litigation Reform Act, PLRA, which says that if you are going to order a prison to reduce its population, you have to have a 3-judge court. One judge cannot do that. That's too much power. The stakes are too high. You have to have a 3-judge court to do that, and you have to petition through the Prison Litigation Reform Act. Well, the mental health case, Larry Carlton's case in Sacramento, they petitioned him to go use the PLRA. They find that the PLRA applies, and they petitioned me separately. And the way it happens, if they petition me, the PLRA says that I will be one of the members of the 3-judge court, that the chief of the Ninth Circuit will select another district court judge. There will be 2 district court judges and a circuit court judge. But we had these 2 cases, and we thought, well, wouldn't that be great if we consolidated Larry's case, the mental health, with my case, the physical health, and we would have 2 pretty good judges on that case. And that's what happened. They consolidated the cases, and so the 2 district court judges that are on the 3-judge court were the judges that had the 2 consolidated cases. And then the chief judge selects a judge from the Ninth Circuit, and it's voluntary. You can assign the judge, but the judge doesn't have to take it. So the first 2 judges that the chief assigned, they didn't want the case. They were too busy, or they didn't want that kind of case. And it went down a couple of more times, and then it got to Judge Reinhardt. He's the savviest judge I've ever met. He knew how everything worked, and I learned so much from him. And he didn't want to take it, but he said, "Who's next on the list if I turn it down?" And they indicated who it was, and he says, "I'll take it." And so we had a wonderful court, a wonderful 3-judge court. And it was a time of my life working with them. I learned so many things, and if you ever read that case, I've gotten a lot of queries about it, and you might have wondered when you saw that, how did this 3-judge court say, you have to reduce your prison? They were like almost twice as crowded as the design capacity for the prisons, almost twice. And we said, you have to reduce your population to, get this, 137.5% of the design capacity. And people have said for you, how do you come to 0.5%? But that was Reinhardt's understanding of how appellate judges look at it. There was one side that said 130% was a good figure, and the plaintiffs, or the defendants, were pushing for 145%. One of the experts came in between. We said, we're not going to show favoritism for that. We're going to go right in the middle of that. That'll show the appellate court or the Supreme Court that we're being thoughtful and we're not doing favoritism. So we're just all kinds of smart stuff like that that I never would have thought of on my own.
And in the end, that 3-judge district court, even though it starts out as mental care, physical care, it morphs somewhat into a question about overcrowding of the prisons, which relates to how much care you can provide with the resources you have. It goes up to the United States Supreme Court. For those of you who are sort of mavens of federal court jurisdiction, you would know that a 3-judge district court decision is appealed directly to the United States Supreme Court. I never see those. They don't come to me. And the United States Supreme Court affirms in an opinion written by Justice Tony Kennedy, 5-4. Any idea as to why Tony Kennedy would have come out on that side? Justice Kennedy, moderately conservative, to kind of state it generally.
Well, I knew Tony. He's a decent guy. You know, he was a little more conservative than I am, but he's fair-minded. He was from Sacramento. I never talked to Larry about it, but I think Larry knew him, Larry Carlton. And he was from California, and I think he understood these things. I think he had a knowledge. California, by the way, any of you who don't know it, really has the largest prison. We're awful on prison. We have the largest prison population of any state in the union, and if you made California, just made it a separate entity, we have the 5th largest prison population of any country in the world. Just if you by countries, California would be 5. I think Kennedy knew that. It was sort of known. And anyway, I think he did the right thing on this.
So we end up, and again, for those of you interested in reading, the Supreme Court opinion by Justice Kennedy is 563 U.S. 493, 2011. So if you're interested in reading that one, it's all laid out. Justice Kennedy approving what the 3-judge district court did, and ratifying the end of a very long journey in that case. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the hour. I could go on with about 3 more hours of Judge Henderson's stories, but I'm
we will.
Yeah,
and we will. Because one of the wonderful parts of the gift about the House is every year there will be an event like this about Judge Henderson. year, Judge Henderson, I hope you will come back next year and continue this conversation. Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.